Special thanks to my Patreon patrons, Noble Tier and Larking Tier. Hey guys, it's Michael, and we are back for the final part of Wendigoon's conspiracy theory Iceberg. So, after this, I'll finally be able to get into some more of his videos. I was trying to get through most of this video, or all of it, before I tried to do more of his. I was doing periodically some of his videos, but I really wanted to get through this one. So this will be the last video of his conspiracy theory Iceberg, and it'll be tier 10, or tier 0 it says on here. Is there anything in here I can see? Oh, this one kind of makes sense. Real humans died a millennia ago. Oh, maybe not. I was thinking about the time whenever there was multiple types of Homo sapiens, or just human sort of people that we killed off, like Neanderthals and stuff. God's ego death. I've heard of that too. And I think that's it. But let's get into it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final part of the conspiracy theory Iceberg. Bank of Souls is a concept that originated from Jewish mysticism, however, it's been adapted into several other religious theories as well. According to the legend of the Bank of Souls, there is a finite amount of souls that can ever exist within human history. Specifically, this pool of souls is known as the Chamber of Guff and exists at the base of the Tree of Life. According to this legend, the Tree of Life bears fruit, and that fruit is actual human souls. Whenever a child is conceived, Gabriel reaches into the chamber, which is around the base of the tree where the fruit has fallen. He draws out a random soul, and that is passed into the new human that was just created.
So it's like reincarnation, kind of.
This tree has seasons of plenty and seasons of famine. In other words, there are some times when there are more people in the world than the tree can provide. According to the theory around the Bank of Souls, if someone is born or conceived at the time that there's not a soul for it, it will simply be born as a person without a soul. This is especially true in the modern age when the population is at the highest that it's ever been, and the tree cannot sustain the amount of people being born. These soulless people, or NPCs as the internet so delicately puts it, exist on Earth along with people who do have souls, and as a matter of fact, in some cases are used specifically to test those who do have souls to judge their worth. In other words, according to the theory, there are some people who exist and simply do not have control of their own actions, so they are purposefully made as a means to judge those who can be judged. You can follow that theory further and say that the reason you're so used to seeing people who have what is to you completely mind-numbing opinions and are constantly at opposition with you is a deliberate choice from whoever is controlling the system.
I just now noticed this. I really like his dolls in the back. They look really cool. Just a side note.
Means to see how you deal with opposition. The theory has several continuing shoots similar to that coming off of it. For example, there is one side of it that says several different cults or quote-unquote satanic rings who perform human sacrifices are just doing it as a means of sending a soul back to the tree for replenishing, as well as other theories that say whenever the tree finally runs out of souls completely, that is the apocalypse and when the world will end. So yeah, soulless people are put on the world simply as morality speech checks. Try not to think about it too much. Incorruptible saints is a phenomena that has been reported specifically in Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches. According to these religions, several people have been found throughout history whose bodies have been completely untouched by decomposition. Specifically throughout the 14 and 1600s, bodies were exhumed that had been buried for hundreds of years, and whenever they were found, it seemed as if the person was simply sleeping. This has been such a common occurrence that there's actually a rule in Orthodox common law that says a bishop has to show up and affirm that the body is in fact incorruptible. In several of the instances where an incorruptible saint was found, they were placed underneath the altar of churches as it was shown God had favor on that person, and hopefully that favor will apply to the church. Also, for those that don't know, be considered a saint within Orthodox and Catholic tradition, there is a set of requirements that the person has to do, and one of them is to perform a miracle. For a long time, having an incorruptible body was seen as a miracle in itself. So if that person followed the other steps in their life that qualified them for sainthood, and then their body was found to be incorruptible, they were then affirmed as a saint. Between things like this and Saint Padre Pio Stigmata and the miracle of Lanciano, which are things I'm going to casually mention and maybe talk about in the future, this has been seen as evidence to some as proof of the Christian God. We're now breaking into the first philosophy one, which there's going to be several more of,
Okay.
with the God of the gaps never existed. Now, it's kind of debated where the phrase God of the gaps first originated.
Don't even know what it
Nietzsche
means.
said in one of his writings, specifically, I believe it was in On Priest, that he said whenever there is a gap in human understanding, Christians specifically fill it with God, and that's where God comes from. So according to
Okay.
Nietzsche, God isn't real, and whenever people say there is a God, it's just because humanity can't explain something, and God makes for a good scapegoat. The other place the phrase may have come from is from Henry Drummond, who was an evangelist who also accused the idea of God of the gaps as being a lazy write-off for understanding. Drummond said that Christians constantly have
So
these
Uno
gaps in their
reverse.
knowledge that they choose to fill with God, and that was the wrong way of going about it. According to Drummond, God either has to be the God of everything, or he just simply doesn't exist. In other words, we can't have God be this spontaneous miracle worker who shows up to fill in things that we can't quite explain and then explain the rest away as natural processes of science. In other words, God is either absolute or he doesn't exist, and that's what God of the gaps never existed is trying to get across. See, the whole God of the gaps mentality is believed by many to be part of the reason that Christianity and belief itself has declined so much in the last century. In other words, before modern science, there really wasn't a way to explain the world outside of some supernatural entity. But now science is at a near complete point in understanding the world around us. Those gaps have gotten smaller. So people who apply God to those gaps have caused God to become smaller. This is why the concept
Okay.
is considered a bad thing by both evangelist and atheist. The
Is it?
reason that it's this low
It's
on the
because it makes it to where God is less of an important figure because he's gotten smaller over the years because of the God of the gaps. It's a pretty cool concept.
iceberg is because it implies that if there is a divine creator or some God above us, then it has to be 100% all-encompassing in every aspect of our lives. This is sort of the antithesis to the agnostic point of view. There can't be a God who works some of the time and then everything else is science, because if we just apply God to those little miracles, we'll eventually figure out that they're all different rules of the world that we live in. So if we were created, then a creator had to inspire and create every single one of those rules, meaning that the entire human experience is completely curated, which is either very comforting or very terrifying depending on who you are. Oil and resources from humans is the rather depressing thought that
Oh,
there is a good chance a lot of biofuel comes from humans.
yeah,
Now,
it's
while
possible.
with crude oil, it could take, a really long time for the matter of humans to compress into it, it is not a secret that humans go through methogenesis, where their body produces methane, which is absolutely a fuel. So the theory is saying that perhaps the methane gas that you use to heat your home isn't entirely dinosaur fuel and could potentially be one of the 108 billion people who have died on this planet. And of course, some have taken this theory farther.
Oh, I did not know that many people had died. 108 billion. It's crazy.
To say that perhaps those in power have figured out a quick way to make crude oil and that humans are being farmed as the resource. Feelings autosuppression relates to a sort of global desensitization that has taken place over the last several decades. So to make it more personal, remember the first time that you saw a scary face pop up on YouTube or in a movie and you were a little kid and it scared you really bad, but then after you saw more and more over and over, you kind of quit caring? And you know how that same thing also happened with human suffering? Like the first time you may have heard about a dangerous attack against a group of people, you were very worried,
Yeah,
but then it
you
just
get
became such a
desensitized
common
to
thing
stuff.
you quit caring. That constant loop of negative emotions can cause you to suppress them whenever they come to the surface, which is a totally natural human response. However, when this response happens across the entire population for years on end, the results can be a little concerning, particularly on the next generations moving forward. In other words, children today are not nearly as worried or concerned about world events as perhaps the generation before them was at their age. Because this constant stream of negativity has served to cause a worldwide autosuppression of negative emotions. Not only
It's so scary because nowadays, because when I was really, really young, the internet, was it around? I'm trying to think. Yeah, it was definitely around, but it was still infancy, so it wasn't like crazy good or anything. So, and I could just imagine kids nowadays are probably so desensitized to things because of news and just YouTube in general and things like that, getting all of that stuff to them. Ooh, that's actually kind of scary.
That, but it's been shown that apathy or simply holding in emotions can cause feelings of depression as well as illnesses if gone on for too long. So, similar to earlier on the iceberg, where I said that things like toxoplasmosis has changed the whole of human history, simply disregarding our basic human emotions has quite potentially changed the course of humanity forever. Adult film stars
Hmm.
leeching your energy is the natural conclusion of several things that I've talked about up until this point. Remember the
I mean,
succubus that I talked about way, way back?
yeah,
Essentially, these demonic or spiritual entities that want to steal your life force. And I believe it was in the last year I talked about erotic energy that you literally give off whenever you give off those emotions. Well, in the 21st century, what do you think would be the most effective way for those entities to steal that energy from you? That's right, the internet. And according to this, the energy
makes
that you
sense.
feel being drained from you afterwards is quite literally energy that has been drained from you. Earlier in the iceberg, I talked about Kundalini energy and how it can be stolen from someone over a distance. While this is saying that perhaps through the digital screen, it has been stolen from thousands, if not millions, of people for the past few decades, and no
Yeah.
one's the wiser. Virus 23 is kind of the predecessor to things like the Despair Code. According to various board posts, Virus 23 has traced its way all the way back to old Cold War Russian documents, specifically documents that were researching mimetic entities. There's this entire theory that's worked its way around the globe for a while around things like shared consciousness and shared stories. I've talked about earlier on this iceberg, and I know I keep saying that, but this
Or
is
like
the final tier and
dragons
it
and
does
stuff
put the
like
bow
that.
on a lot of theories. But I talked earlier about how someone on one side of the planet can develop these spontaneous ideas at the same time that someone on the other side of the planet does as well. Well, this isn't only seen in things like technology, but is also seen in things like theories and ideas in philosophy. And because things like human thought patterns and memory aren't fully understood, there's a belief that this exists in a sort of cloud that encompasses everyone at once. So, if this does exist as a sort of shared memory bank, is it possible to transmit a virus through it? Virus 23
Ooh,
works as a self
ooh,
replicating mental contagion. In other words,
mm.
once one person is conscious of it, that causes them to think of it. It then goes to this sort of cloud of human understanding and is continued to pass down through the line. Some have even said that this
Ooh,
virus was originally started by Cicada, which, if you'll remember, like back in Tier
yeah,
2, were the
the
people who
code
hosted
breakers.
that sort of nationwide scavenger hunt. And while some think merely hearing the words Virus 23 is enough to
I don't
transmit
know
the
about that
virus,
one.
I don't believe that is what the theory is going with. See, with a lot of those documents and the idea of mimetic entities, it particularly is saying that it can be hidden within an unassuming thing. In other words, it could be a story, it could be a character, it could be a phrase, or whatever. Some random stories or media or folklore or whatever could exist as these sort of trip mines throughout the human understanding that, whenever stepped on, could cause, I don't know, paranoia or depression or some negative thing. I mean, I imagine it's not positive. I imagine if you get Virus 23, you don't become like an upstanding citizen all of a sudden. What makes this, if it was to be real, more threatening than the Despair Code is you could at least see the Despair Code coming, whereas Virus 23 could literally be anything. Pancreas
Hmm.
denial. Have you ever seen your pancreas? That's what I thought, moving on. I'm just kidding, that's not the theory, but it would be
Okay,
really funny if it was. According to the theory, your pancreas is actually your third chakra and is used to filter things like negative energy.
okay, this is not
Supposedly,
what I
the
expected.
powers that be that know about the power of the pancreas don't want the common person to have access to the pancreas's true capabilities. So they have done things like store negative energy in our food, in the media we consume, and other nefarious means of anti pancreas propaganda as a means to stifle
Okay,
the human spirit. And if you've heard of someone getting their pancreas removed, it's simply because their filter was too clogged with all of the negative energy in the world. Patterns manipulation in itself is really broad, but I'm going to look at a specific avenue of it. Essentially, it's saying that there are patterns that exist within thought and reality as a whole. In
Didn't he do something on this already? Wasn't it like sacred geometry or something like that? That's what it sort of sounds like already.
other words, everything from how you think to the world you exist in revolves around these certain patterns. Several
Mm-hmm.
people who experiment with psychotropic drugs say that while under the influence of them, they
Yeah,
begin
they
to
see
see
these
patterns
shapes.
and other designs creep up in the world around them. A lot of this relates back to things like sacred geometry.
Yeah, yeah.
And human thought patterns are called just that because people tend to think in regards to what they know. In other words, if you are trying to get someone to believe a different truth or the truth you want them to, you begin by starting with things that they already know as fundamental truth and working your way from there because human brains exist in these realm of patterns. If I was to just run up to you and say that Bigfoot's in my backyard, you may say, "You're crazy. Why are you telling me this? Get out of my house." But if I was to approach you and say, there's several species of gorillas that have existed that kind of just disappeared from the biological tree, and every time that we go searching in the forest, we find new species of monkey here and there who are normally in endangered populations. Well, who's to say that one of these species of gorillas didn't get really tall and they just migrated their way north from South America,
I
and
mean,
now one of them's in my backyard? You'll still probably tell me to get out of your house, but what I did is I worked off of something that you know and then changed it from there. Therefore,
mm-hmm.
by manipulating the patterns of your own thought, I got you to a conclusion that you never would have accepted otherwise. The theory is saying that perhaps this same manipulation could exist within reality. Concepts like magic or illusion can be performed in legitimacy if that person can manipulate the patterns reality works within. In a sense, this is similar to a lot of what modern science and chemistry have been able to do in themselves. They have understood how the fundamental world works around them and then manipulated it within its own rules to get it to a place that you would have been executed for in the Dark Ages. And if I'm able to convince you about Bigfoot, then what could be possible if someone really tapped into the patterns of the world around us? Ascension Blacklist is implying that there are some people who will not be allowed to ascend to the next plane of existence. Think about it this way. If souls do
Kind of
exist
like
as
heaven.
these eternal entities, and if things like reincarnation exist, then who's to say that
Oh, so someone infinitely is. Oh, that's kind of crazy.
some can't remember past instances or have a greater understanding of the world around us? So obviously, these people who may have a higher plane of knowledge than the rest of us could have grudges against people here on Earth. Ascension Blacklist is postulating that perhaps the purpose of secret societies like the Illuminati or insert other creepy shadow government thing is to decide who will and will not be allowed in eternity. Getting into theories like this is fun because there's entire things talking about the NPCs from earlier, how they are used specifically to target the people who have been blacklisted, and that in some cases the people who have been blacklisted can be such a positive influence to those NPCs that they get back on the entry list. But the short of it for this video is saying that secret societies or secret organizations who have a better understanding of the eternity and of the human soul have a say in who is and is not allowed in. Oikiosis, and according to the internet, that is how it's pronounced, I looked one up this time, is closely related to ideas of Stoicism. So without getting into hundreds of years of philosophizing, Stoicism is essentially the idea that the purpose of life is a perfection of the human soul. In other words, life itself is a sort of test for how one will be judged in the afterlife. Now, if you're familiar with most religions, this isn't a crazy far out there concept, or at least you've heard of it before. However, oikiosis is where the interesting part comes in. Oikiosis is roughly translated to relation or someone's relationship with something else. Applied to Stoicism, oikiosis is saying that one of the chief concepts of humanity is that humanity's perfection is defined by its interaction with others. So if one is to achieve this quote-unquote perfect soul, it has to be through actions of charity and goodness to other people. The reason it's on this iceberg is due to something called Dasein's teachings, or Dasein. Dasein is a German concept that was brought up around the 19th century that said oikiosis is falling apart because of humanity's increased isolation. In other words, humans over the years have become more self-centered and self-interested, and that has caused the very fabric of their souls to fall apart because they are no longer performing acts of goodness or charity with others because they're more invested in their own devices. A lot of applications of this come down to anti-tech stuff and, like iPhone bad. But in short, it's saying that partial, if not all of humanity has been doomed because we've quit striving for that human perfection. For soul removal is the idea that every human is born with a soul, but it can be taken from you. Not only through things like occult rituals, which those also count, but even things like traumatic events or just simple disbelief can cause pieces of your soul to whittle away over time. This leaves the individual open to attack, where negative spirits can come and fill in that place that they left open within their soul, and that's where things like possession come from. Not only that, but this theory says that wayward souls that have been separated from their human host float around as sparse energy, and in large enough amounts can achieve forms like that of a ghost or a cryptid. In other words, the reason things like old asylums are so haunted is because so many people have had pieces of their soul chipped away at them in there that those pieces now just wander the area looking for their human host. And the only way to prevent things like negative souls or negative entities from attacking you is to do things like ensure a positive environment and energy for yourself and continue to believe in things, because if you don't use that space for your soul, there's a chance that something else will. Real Humans Died Millennia Ago is saying that
Okay, I'm really
the
interested
way
in
we
this.
currently exist is not humanity's highest form. You know how you hear about things like the pyramid or structures like Atlantis, and people always say they had to be these super geniuses to build all of that? Well, it's saying that perhaps while technology has increased over the centuries, human thought has decreased, to the degree that us as we function now would be near unrecognizable from our ancestors. How unrecognizable, you
Probably
may ask?
true.
Well, some have pointed to things that I've mentioned earlier in this iceberg, like statues of reptilians in Middle Eastern tombs. Or even old legends of things like elves or mermaids could just be other forms of humanity when we were at a higher function. Or there's even some depictions of these like really big people who used to be able to make these really cool structures because they were really tall and strong. And I'm going to contain myself now, and I'm not going to say it, so we're just going to move on. Artifice predens relates back to the concept of the Great Cycle that I've mentioned a few times up until now. It points out the weird concept that in the human record, there seems to be these pieces of artificial construction that have shown up before we started using them. Essentially, some formed metals and elements have been found that have led the way for human innovation, but now we have to manufacture, so it's kind of weird that they were there to begin with. Also, remember some of those things I talked about earlier in the iceberg, like how microchips or fuses have been found in ancient pottery? Or the idea like structures like pyramids and aqueducts were seemingly discovered and then forgotten and then rediscovered? This all relates back to the concept of the Great Cycle and says that perhaps the previous people or whatever existed in our stead left behind some pieces, either on purpose or accident, that were the foundation of our cycle, and so on and so forth. Hiring a hitman on yourself
Why is this on the
something
iceberg?
else. This
I'm sure
is
it's
more of
true.
a thought concept than anything else. And while I think it's funny that it's this low on the iceberg, it may be just a little bit misplaced. So
Yeah.
it's known that in several religions or spiritual practices...
Okay, this isn't where I was thinking it was going to go. Hiring a hitman on yourself is something I thought people could do on the dark web. So that's what I assumed it was going to be. But he's saying spiritual, so I don't know.
Committing self-unexist is generally frowned upon. So the hiring a hitman on yourself asks the philosophical question, is it the action or the intent that would condemn somebody? With some stating that hiring a hitman on yourself would be a way to subvert the consequences of the thing that would eventually accomplish. Or if you were ever
Why
just
not
bored
both?
and wanted to make your life more challenging, you could just do that anyway and then
What I'm saying is, why not the action and the intent be the bad thing? I mean, they both could be in tandem be the bad thing. Yeah, that's how I would look at it.
try to survive, and it would make your week a lot more interesting. Roman Empire Still Rules the World originally comes from the author Philip K. Dick, which I talked about earlier on this iceberg. A lot of people believe that he was more in tune with the underhanded goings on in the world than most people, and in one of the stories he wrote later in his life, he said that the Roman Empire never collapsed, and instead several of its senators went into hiding and became the foundation for modern New World Orders or secret societies.
Illuminati.
In other words, they didn't maintain their population or space, but they did maintain their influence. There's even a book written called Descent that talked about how the Roman Empire went into the caverns of the hollow earth and exists as a quite literal underbelly of the world's government at large. And also, if you wanted to say that, whenever the Roman Empire fell, that's when like the Vatican and the Catholic Church really took off. And I mean, they got a whole lot of influence. So, I mean, fractalization is very closely related to pattern manipulation because fractalization is believed to be the patterns of reality itself. People who experiment with very heavy psychotropic drugs like DMT and LSD say that whenever they're experiencing the high, they begin to see the world or a sort of plane of fractals. In other words, these geometric patterns that separate the world at large into these shapes. Some refer to this plane of existence as hyperreality, and there's some who even believe that this is the true state of being and the human condition is just numb to it. In other words, we exist in a dull state of mind on sort of the first level of our reality, and doing things that cause your mind to leave that reality lets you see the world for what it truly is, or at least a different realm that exists around us. I'll be 100% honest with you guys. Things like this really interest me, but I'm also very, very dumb to, and it's something in the future that I'm going to research more. Well, I mean, not like I'm not going there, but it's something that I'm going to look into more because some of the stuff here, as someone who reads about this stuff all the time, really freaks me out, and I mean that in the best way. Paleolithic deep state is another one of those natural conclusions to things mentioned earlier on the iceberg. So remember how I talked about how Neanderthals supposedly didn't die, they just kind of went away and did their own thing for a while? Well, this is saying perhaps they went underground, maybe even literally, and began the structures of the world's government and society as we know it now. Now, according to this, they wouldn't still be in the state we know of them in the historical record. If Homo sapien adapted, then the Neanderthal would adapt as well. But with things like their disappearance from the historical record, as well as odd cave art that shows these kind of human things existing around humans as we know them, implies to some that maybe they achieved some higher form of being, whether that being an underground deep state like I mentioned earlier as the first New World Order, or maybe as some ascended form of person. Also, while researching this, I saw a theory that said Cain is the leader of them, and that he never died, and that he's leading the Neanderthal New World Order, and I had nowhere to add that in, but that is too cool not to, and we're moving on. Depression overriding seems really simple at first, but it's the spiritual implications that put it on this level. If you are depressed or sad or any negative emotion, and you manage to find a way within your head to flip that around into a positive emotion, that may not seem like a lot to you, but if you view things like energy and spiritualism as tangible things, then you just committed a form of spiritual alchemy. This relates to the idea that humans are a much more powerful creature than most of us realize. And if we're so concerned with things like the energy and the spiritual and the extra dimensions around us and everything else, we take for granted the little sort of miracles that we can perform. Things like turning a negative energy into a positive one. And if physical energy, as we understand it in physics, cannot be created or destroyed, then perhaps spiritual energy cannot be created or destroyed either, only converted. And by doing something as wild as converting negative energy, you're exercising a form of supernatural powers. So if you want to get really out there with all our postulations, take something like Virus 23 or the solar plexus clown glider or whatever, and imagine those mimetic agents that are meant to harm you. Well, if you have the capability to convert that into a positive force, then there's no telling what's possible now, is there? Incorings are referring to the absolutes that exist in human culture. In other words, take all the human cultures that exist around the world who for a long time never had contact with each other. You will always see some absolutes, things like weaponry, religion, language, or things like statues or burial sites or just monuments in general. For whatever reason, it seems like these things are engraved on people as a whole. You could view this as a sort of puzzle. If we're to figure out what our purpose on Earth is or what existence means as a whole, then maybe we have the pieces to figure it out, and everyone has their own pieces. We just haven't really put it together yet. So let's take that another step forward with all the weird theories we've talked about to this point, and think about something like the Great Cycle, which I'm going to keep mentioning because it's really cool. Think about how often things like pyramids supposedly pop up through the cycles, or things like human history traveling along the same path. If one was to truly believe in things like reincarnation and the idea that we are being tested over and over again to figure out what we're supposed to do, maybe if someone can throw all of this together, it would break the cycle. Soy Grand Theory, because I
Oh
know you've
God,
been waiting for
so
the
much
finale
soy.
of the government-sanctioned weaponized femboys, and here it is. Soy Grand Theory is saying that the soyification of society isn't even reliant on soy. It's solely reliant on the cultural shift caused by it. In other words, the effects of soy has caused permanent damage to the human population that cannot be reversed, and the
Okay.
influence of soy products on humanity will lead to a totalitarian femboy empire. You're welcome. Golden Rules of Nature is related to the 5 basic golden rules of nature. The idea is for something to survive within nature, it has to have balance, growth, connection, harmonization, and love. Now that sounds weird, but let's break that down. You have to be balanced in the way you live. You can't be one way or the other. And this applies not only to humans, but things in nature as a whole. You have to grow. If you're stagnant for too long, you'll be dead. And you have to be connected to the world around you because isolation also leads to death. You have to harmonize with the world around you because if you take too much or are too violent, that will eventually come back on you. And the love is saying that there has to be a passion or drive because depression is a killer. So that's kind of weird to have that little slice of life knowledge this low on the iceberg. But the implications of it is if the physical realm is representative of the spiritual realm, then perhaps those 5 rules also apply to the spiritual. If one is not balanced, grown, connected, harmonized, and in love with their spiritual lifestyle, then that leads to a spiritual death. And since things like spiritualism aren't exactly exemplified in the modern age, this is saying that because we're not following those 5 rules, society as a whole is spiritually dying and will, I'm sure, lead to something bad in the future because we are not treating spiritual existence in the same way we treat physical existence. We are now down to the final 5 terms of the conspiracy theory iceberg, and I saved these 5 for a particular reason. I think they're not only some of the biggest overall topics, but it seems like a fitting place to close this iceberg on. God's ego death in research.
I've heard this, and I don't remember the theory that well, so I'm pretty excited for him to kind of get into it a bit more in depth.
Is, I think, probably the most misinterpreted one on the entire iceberg.
Oh, maybe
Everywhere
I'm
I looked
wrong.
in research for this, people were hyper-focusing on the ego term. See, ego, as it's understood in psychology, is the self, or it's the idea of oneself. So in that sense, you would think ego death, as it's often called within the hero's journey of storytelling, would mean the destroying of one's own opinion or perspective. In other words, if you have a character in a story who has very hard set fundamental beliefs and then something happens to them and they change those beliefs, that is considered an ego death. However, what I think this iceberg is getting across, because everything else on the iceberg kind of points that direction, is the other definition of ego death. An ego death or ego loss is what it's considered in very, very hardcore drug trips whenever someone's soul leaves their person. Or even more specifically, whenever your soul escapes your mind and your concept of thought and existence. In other words, it's separating part of yourself from another part of yourself. Here, when it says God's ego death, it's not talking about a change of heart God had. It's talking about God's separation of God himself. Think about it this way. Remember when I was talking about the God of the gaps didn't exist earlier, and it got across the notion that everything has to be either the total creation of God or none of it was? Well, if every part of existence is a part of God himself, then that implies that at some point, God was just one entity. See, if at one point God was just one being that existed as a perfect form of existence, then anything that he created other than himself had to be a step down. So in this form, God's ego death was a departure from himself into this other existence. It was, in a sense, the death of the one true perfection. Some have even taken this theory as to be the root of fractals themselves. Remember how I mentioned that people who have these crazy experiences say the entire world exists in these patterns, or that things like human thought and reality exist in patterns? Perhaps these broken patterns are the pieces of God separated from one perfect entity into the world around us. We hear of concepts in Christianity like the Trinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and imagine God separating himself into three, and this is extending it to the point that God separated himself into everything. But why would God do that? Why would a singular perfect being stoop himself to the point of humanity in order to create them? And that goes into the next theory, God's last wish. One commonality that is seen
Ooh, that's a
across
strong.
every...
Ooh, that's such a strong thing. I can already kind of guess what this is gonna be. Is instead of God still being here, God used the last of his power to create this all, and that would be such a cool concept.
Every religion is that in the beginning, in creation, God created humanity in order to have a companion. But it's not exactly a companion if it's just a clone of yourself that's as perfect as you are. So according to this, God's last wish, the thing that he broke himself into infinite pieces for in order to begin creation, was in order to create free will. The one thing that God ruled as being better than divinity was the existence of choice. And again, in nearly every religion, the core idea is that humanity separated themselves from God because of a selfish choice. And it's the concept that in the end, humanity exists as pieces of God who have done whatever they've wanted to with that free will. And according to that, because we finally get a happy theory on this iceberg, every single person is a piece of the perfect God who has been given the opportunity in their life to demonstrate how they will use that perfect soul to do whatever choices they wish. And the reason this is such a big deal and so low on the iceberg is because it implies that humanity does in fact have a purpose, and that purpose is a demonstration of the concept of choice in order to eventually return to the companionship with God in divinity. In other words, God's last wish is saying that God destroyed absolute perfection in order to give humanity their own chance. And then finally, we're into the last three entries of the conspiracy theory iceberg, and all three of them are very closely related. There is no conspiracy refers to the idea that there is no objective truth that is being hidden from us. It's kind of weird to get all the way to the bottom of the iceberg and then to hear it say that no conspiracy is actually real. But what this is saying is that there is no secret society, there is no hidden power, there is no shadow government, or anything else that has a better grasp of the human condition than we ourselves. See, there's this weird kind of comfort in the idea that there is some grand truth or grand secret of the universe that's just being hidden from us. Because then, if someone else is hiding it from us, that means it's something that we can understand and something that we can put together. But if the truth is in actuality that we're all just as lost as each other and there is no one person in control, that makes the conclusion all the more terrifying. Any hidden order or grasp to maintain power is just someone else exactly like us trying to find purpose in a world that confuses us. In short, there can be no leader if all of us are lost, and in a way, everyone is trying to find their own path. Which leads directly into the next theory: all conspiracies are true. I know it's kind of weird to have
Had to
no
contradict.
conspiracy is real, and then all conspiracies are real, but they're talking about two different things. No conspiracy is true is saying that there is no grand conspiracy against you, the person, whereas all
Oh.
conspiracies are true is saying that all hidden truths or hidden secrets of the world are interconnected. I've kind of mentioned this before with ideas of the grand unified religious theory or the grand unified conspiracy theory. If you've paid attention up until this point, then you've probably realized there's a lot of concepts and ideas that sound really similar to each other, they just have a couple words mixed around. The idea
Hmm.
behind this is that every understanding of religion, esoteric nature, karma, chakras, spiritualism, and what have you are all getting back to the root source. So no, it's not referring to the idea that the earth is both round and flat and a donut and hollow and inside out,
Yeah.
sadly, but the idea that all of these broad concepts of human nature are branches of the same tree that we're all working our way to the roots of. And concepts like this can be overwhelming. It seems to a lot of people who spend a lot of time in topics like this that the world is this impossible puzzle that is never meant to be understood. This is the same reason that a lot of people who dedicate their lives to religious and supernatural studies end up with a feeling of insignificance. It's hard to try to grasp the concept of everything and to not come out feeling like a nothing. But that's where the final concept of the conspiracy theory iceberg comes in, the final understanding. The final understanding is thought to be the destination of most forms of spiritual practice and meditation. In other words, cultures that have developed ideas of things like nirvana, enlightenment, ascension, or what have you all come back to one core idea. And sadly, I can't just say some magical phrase that will automatically make you achieve a higher plane of existence, at least not yet. However, there is one idea that permeates whenever you're looking at things like conspiracy theories or hidden secrets of the world that keeps coming back as a constant. And that is the idea that your perspective is with purpose. Think about all the crazy stuff I've talked about that has to do with metaphysics and magic and geometry and esoteric religion and theoretical science and what have you. A lot of these concepts can seem so big that they swallow up the concept of the individual. And while some of these theories are bigger than the scope of one person, there is no theory that is beyond the reach of one person. In other words, if you're trying to achieve a higher plane of meditation, or a deeper grasp of conceptual science that isn't real yet, or an understanding of ultra realities, or learning about the lost gaps in human history, or trying to figure out secret religions that have been covered up for decades, or anything in between. Every single concept is tailor-made for you, the individual. And even if in some of them you can't always be an active participant, you are designed to be the one true witness. Whenever talking about things like the human soul and eternity, it's really hard to kind of narrow it down to a place that we can grab it because it seems beyond our reach. When in actuality, if it's some hidden secret or supernatural knowledge we want to learn about, we have the key. The best way I heard this described is that everything is you and everything is me. Because in the entirety of human thought, there has never been one concept, theory, or idea that was made by humanity in the absence of humanity. In other words, don't spend your life worrying that you're missing out on something greater than yourself, because according to the final understanding, you're right where you're supposed to be. And with that, we have the end of the conspiracy theory iceberg. While I was
Oh, alright. I'm gonna say real quick, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy this. And I really appreciate Wendigoon making this conspiracy theory iceberg, even though it was freaking so long. But I'm gonna let him close it out.
researching the final understanding, I normally do like word searches or phrase searches to see where they pop up online. And I found a Reddit post from 11 months ago where someone was asking about the final understanding, and a guy replied and said, I don't know, but there's this YouTuber Wendigoon who is currently doing a series on it. He just got done with the first episode, but one day he'll get there. So make sure you're watching when he does. And now, here I am, and I made it, and we all made it. And whenever I started, I never thought that I would get this far, yet here we are. And I just want to say to the guy who said that, And to everyone who was watching in the beginning, and everyone who picked up along the way, and to everyone who's here now, thank you for watching. So you're here at the end. You've made it through the entire series. I'm sure you feel like you've heard me talk for too long now, but I'm going to talk for just a little bit longer if that's okay. I started out YouTube as a pipe dream. Whenever I began this series, I had, I think, around 200 subscribers. And now, here at the end of this series, I have the golden plaque, and I'm over 1 million. And now there's been so many opportunities and doorways that have opened up for me, and I'm really blessed beyond belief with the life that I've been allowed to live, thanks to God and thanks to you guys for putting me into that position. And just to think about where I was when I started that series to where I am now, I'm so eternally grateful for what you all have given me. It really is overwhelming to have begun that just talking into a camera for fun. And now I'm still doing the same thing, but now I can make a living doing it. And I can tell you I'm not always going to be sitting in this exact corner making videos, because opportunities have opened up for me where I can go out and I can make interesting things that I think you all will enjoy. And I always want to keep it focused on talking about things that I like to talk about, because I think that's when I make the best content and when you guys enjoy it. And as I do that in the future, I'm always going to remember that that only exists because you guys sat down and watched a kid with a camera talk about weird conspiracy theories he found online. And that really is humbling. And it has truly been an honor to make videos for you all. And I am honored that you all have watched them enough that it has put me to this level. And I am extremely grateful. And if you've made it this far, thank you so much. And I hope that the time you've already invested in me, I make something worth of it. And I hope that whatever I do in the future, you find to be worth your time, because you guys are certainly worth mine. So thank you for getting me to this point. Thank you so much for the blessing that you all have been. It really does mean the most. So I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.